Hello, welcome to Lawrence County History Corner. This week we are talking about one of the scarier illnesses in our past. Something that struck terror in most people and did end the lives of many people over the centuries, and that is smallpox. Smallpox has existed for at least 3,000 years. It was first described in China in the 4th century CE, or current area. The 17th century European settlers brought smallpox to the Americas. And it is also smallpox that is given credit, I guess you could say, to causing the death of many Native Americans. The Native Americans who were living in North and South America did not have the immunity that the Europeans did. These were new diseases for them, and so introducing them to these diseases, it ended up killing far more Native Americans than it did even the white settlers, because some of the white settlers had immunity, possibly from previous generations. 3 out of 10 people would die if they caught it. Survivors were often scarred for life. It could be very disfiguring. There was quite a few noted people in our history that had smallpox scars. In the 1800s, the smallpox vaccine was developed. And in 1959, the World Health Organization started a campaign to end smallpox. But it couldn't because of the lack of vaccine funds, personnel, and commitment by the countries. In North America, smallpox had been eliminated by 1952. And in fact, my mom and a lot of people, probably grandmas, great-grandmothers, have the smallpox vaccine that left them a scar. So that was kind of something you could see now. Because our ancestors were vaccinated or survived these illnesses, we didn't have to worry about them. Now, some of these diseases are starting to come back, but smallpox was the last place to be eliminated was in Africa, and that was in 1977. Now, of course, it's not completely eliminated because we do still have cases, but it's very rare. The symptoms, it takes 7 to 19 days to show the first symptoms. First, you develop a rash, then you develop pustules, then the pustules scab over, and then the scabs fall off, and you are left with the scars where the pustules were. Once the scabs fall off, you are no longer contagious, but you are contagious as long as you have the rash and the pustules and the scabs themselves. The first symptoms would be high fever, which is typical of any illness, head and body aches, and sometimes vomiting. So it wasn't like you learned early on if you had it, and it was quite contagious. The railroad helped spread the disease across America in the late 1800s. One of the worst outbreaks occurred in 1870 and 1873 in Massachusetts, where there was over 1,000 deaths. Now, the reason I'm telling you about smallpox, because we had an outbreak in Lawrence County. We probably had multiple ones, but this one in particular occurred in 1876, and it made the news and the Catlettsburg Sentinel, where there were 2 cases of smallpox in Burlington, Ohio, and several cases in the neighborhood of town. All were collared, meaning it was the black members of the community. They were up at Bear Creek, Kentucky, and there are 2 cases also there, also from the black community. And it goes on later. The case develops into a more personal nature because we find an actual person who is named having the smallpox. His name is John Swetnam, Swetnam. He was a black man who had lived in Catlettsburg and had lived in Ironton. He came over on a ferry from South Point, sick with the smallpox. He sought admission into the pest house, but the privileges was denied him. The pest house was a place for people who had no place else to go, and they were really sick. So they would go to the pest house, and a lot of diseases would be found there, tuberculosis, as well as smallpox, and a lot of other contagious diseases. He said he had been sent to Catlettsburg from Ironton, where he had lived. They told him there that he had to keep, that Catlettsburg had a place to keep smallpox patients. They learned, the Catlettsburg Sentinel had learned from the Ironton commercial, I'm assuming the Ironton newspaper is what they mean, that Mr. Sweetnam had lived with Gabe Johnson. Now, Gabe Johnson was a very prominent black man. He was a barbershop owner. He'd helped found Quinn Chapel, but he also was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And he was quite prominent in the black community and within the whole community. He was very well respected. However, this disease was terrifying to most people. After John Sweetnam had broke out with smallpox, he was put in a buggy by Mr. Johnson in the night and sent to the opposite of this place, so opposite of Catlettsburg, and sat out on a bank. So he was taken to probably the Burlington area and sat out. And more high-handed outrage or more inhuman treatment, that is what it was called in the Catlettsburg Sentinel, could scarcely be imagined. Gabe Johnson, a wealthy Negro, as it is referred, was backed by the Ironton authorities. For when they were duly advised next day by Captain Price, they declined to take any action and left the unfortunate man to the mercy of the wind and weather. Now, this is in June, so be hot weather. And Mr. Sumpton, who was the ferryman who took people, and ferries were used before we had bridges to go from Ohio to Kentucky, advised that bringing a man with an infectious disease into town subjected him to a heavy penalty. Looking him up, he took him up and back to the Ohio shore. Having no place to go, he went up the bank a few hundred yards, where there was part of a wreck of a boat laid, and there he found shelter. There he remained. So he remained on the Ohio shore in the wreck of a boat. There was no one to care for him. They were advised that some of the neighbors were carrying provisions to him. So people were trying to take care of him, but no one was physically there all the time while he was sick. Like I said, this was a terrifying disease, so they just assumed if they helped too much, there was a good chance that they could get sick, and then also their families could. We go on to learn that Catlettsburg Sentinel continued with the story, and on June 28th, they announced that John Sweetnam, who had been taken from Ironton because he had smallpox, died on Monday last. So he died in the last part of June. The township authorities provided for him and gave him such attentions as the surroundings would allow. But he was finding shelter in a piece of an old sunken boat across the river from Catlettsburg. The Catlettsburg Sentinel goes on to criticize Ironton, known for its patriotic and support of the black community. They criticize them because they say they acted like they had always been so positive, but when a black man became very sick and needed them, they sent him away. They, in fact, say, leaving him to the cold charity of the world and finally to die. Let this event be duly and appropriately celebrated at her big Habaloo next Tuesday. And I don't know what big party they were referring to, but that is the tragic tale of John Sweetnam and a little bit about smallpox. I hope you enjoy this little piece of Lawrence County history, and I will see you next time.